I've always found thunderstorms oddly comforting. The steady rumble, the flashes of light, it made the world outside feel distant. But that night last summer, I remember sitting by my window, watching rain pour over the fences that lined our suburban street. Everything was quiet except the sound of wind shaking the trees behind my neighbor's house. Our backyards were divided by a tall wooden fence, old and faded from years of weather. Beyond it sat my neighbor's shed, an aging structure tucked into the far corner of their yard. I'd never thought much about it before that night, but something about the way it looked in the storm caught my attention. The lightning illuminated it for a split second, and I could have sworn I saw a shape standing behind it. At first, I figured it was a trick of the light. The rain distorted everything, and the shadows moved unpredictably. But then another flash lit up the sky, and I saw it again. A tall, still figure just behind the shed, like someone was standing there watching. My stomach tightened as the light faded, leaving only darkness and the low hum of thunder rolling in the distance. I tried convincing myself it was just my imagination. Maybe a tree branch caught the light wrong, or maybe my neighbor was outside securing something. Still, I couldn't shake the way the figure looked, completely still, even as the wind blew through everything else. Curiosity got the better of me, so I stood up and pressed closer to the glass. Rain streaked down the window, distorting my view. I waited for the next lightning strike, my eyes locked on the same spot behind the shed. When it came, the figure wasn't there anymore. The yard was empty, the ground glistening from rain, and the shed door now slightly ajar. My chest tightened as I realized it hadn't been opened before. I told myself not to overthink it. People often forget small details when distracted. I decided I'd mention it to my neighbor in the morning, maybe joke about how creepy the storm made his yard look. But even as I turned away, I couldn't help glancing back one last time. The shed door was still open, just enough for darkness to spill out. A thunderclap hit so loud it rattled the window frame. I stepped back, startled, then noticed something new. Near the base of the fence, water was pooling unusually fast, as if the ground there had been recently disturbed. For a second, I thought I saw something move in the reflection, a faint ripple where there shouldn't have been one. I switched off my bedroom light to see clearer through the glass. The neighbor's yard looked darker than ever, except for faint flashes of lightning revealing small details. Grass bent the wrong way, the shed door rocking slightly with the wind. I stared for a long minute, waiting for another glimpse of the figure. But the storm just kept on raging, and the shed stayed still. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the neighborhood eerily calm. I stood by my window again, staring at the neighbor's backyard. The shed door was now closed, and everything looked normal. Too normal, like nothing had happened. Still, I couldn't ignore that uneasy feeling twisting in my gut. Something about last night didn't sit right with me. When I stepped outside, the air was thick and humid. The ground squelched beneath my shoes as I walked to the back fence. Rainwater dripped from the boards, forming muddy puddles along the edge. I noticed the dirt near the bottom was darker and softer, like it had been recently dug up. That was strange. I hadn't seen anyone outside since the storm started. I crouched down, brushing some mud away with a stick. The soil felt fresh, disturbed. I peered through one of the small gaps in the fence. The neighbor's shed sat still in the corner, its weathered walls slick from the rain. Everything looked empty, but the grass around the shed was pressed down, as if someone, or something, had been standing there all night. Later that day, I saw my neighbor outside for the first time in weeks. He was an older man, friendly but private. I called out to him, asking if he'd been outside during the storm. He paused mid-step, glanced toward the shed, and shook his head. "No," he said flatly. "Didn't leave the house once." Then he gave me a short nod and went back inside. That answer didn't make sense. If he hadn't been outside, who or what had I seen behind the shed? That thought lingered the rest of the day. Every time I passed by the window, I found myself staring toward that same corner, waiting for something to move. But nothing did. The shed just sat there, silent and damp under the fading light. By evening, the sky darkened again, though no storm was coming this time. The stillness felt heavier than the night before. I turned off the lights in my room and looked through the window one more time. The shed door was slightly open again, just like it had been during the lightning. I hadn't seen anyone touch it all day. I considered texting a friend about it, but it felt too strange to explain. "Hey, my neighbor's shed keeps opening itself," didn't sound like something that would get taken seriously, so I decided to check it out myself. I grabbed a flashlight, slipped on a jacket, and stepped out quietly through the back door. The night was dead quiet except for the faint hum of distant cars. As I approached the fence, my flashlight beam reflected off wet wood. I hesitated for a second before leaning over the top to get a better view. The shed door was now wide open. Inside, the light caught something, maybe a chair or maybe a figure crouched low, just out of sight. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, looked again, but the space inside was completely empty. Only the rain-soaked air drifted through. I stayed frozen there, staring into the dark opening until my flashlight flickered, then died. I don't know why, but I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that dark, open shed. The image of that figure, or whatever I'd seen, kept replaying in my head. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on trying to rest and went back to the window. The yard was dimly lit by the neighbor's porch light, but the shed door was shut again. For a while, I just watched, waiting for something to move. Minutes passed, maybe longer, and nothing happened. The air was completely still. Then, as a faint breeze swept through, I noticed something strange. The tall grass near the shed was bending one way, but the trees swayed another. It was subtle, but wrong enough to make me uneasy. I decided to record it on my phone. I zoomed in toward the shed, trying to catch the motion, when the porch light flickered once. In that brief blink of darkness, I thought I saw someone standing in front of the shed. When the light steadied, there was nothing there, just the shed, silent as before. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my neighbor. I didn't even know he had my number. The text said, "Don't look outside tonight." My hands went cold. Before I could type back, another flash lit up the sky. Lightning again, distant but bright enough to light both yards for an instant. And in that flash, I saw it. Standing directly behind the shed again, motionless, tall, its outline too human to dismiss, but too still to feel real. The thunder came seconds later, long and deep, as if shaking the air itself. When it passed, the yard was dark, but now the shed door was open, wide open. I stepped back from the window, heart racing. My screen lit up again, another text from the neighbor. It read, "It comes when the ground moves." I froze, staring out into the rain-slick darkness. I looked down at the base of the fence and saw the soil shifting, like something was pushing upward from underneath. I turned away from the glass, backing toward the door, every instinct telling me to leave the room. Then came a slow, steady creak, the sound of the fence bending. I forced myself to look back and saw fingers curling over the top edge. Mud-covered, long, gripping the wood tight. I ran down the hall, shaking, yelling for help that no one answered. When I came back with my phone's light on, the fingers were gone, the yard empty again. Only the rain kept falling, washing away whatever marks had been there. The shed door, though, it was now shut, locked tight like nothing had moved. I never saw the figure again after that night. My neighbor moved out 2 weeks later, leaving the shed behind. Sometimes, when storms roll through, I still catch myself staring toward that corner of the yard, waiting for lightning. And every now and then, I swear the shed door twitches, just slightly, like it remembers. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It happened last spring, on one of those quiet suburban nights when the air feels heavy and still. The house was calm except for the low hum of the refrigerator and distant crickets outside. My mom was in the living room folding laundry, the TV murmuring softly. I remember that night because the sky outside had that strange orange tint right before the storm rolled in. The sound of the wind started to pick up, brushing against the trees behind our fence. I was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone when I heard my mom call out, "Can you make sure the back door's closed?" Her tone was casual, the kind that didn't make you think twice. I got up, still half focused on my screen, and headed toward the sliding glass door at the back of the house. Our backyard wasn't huge, but it backed up to another house whose porch light always stayed on. That faint glow always spilled into our yard through the cracks in the fence. As I got closer, I noticed the curtains by the door swaying slightly from a small draft. The door wasn't fully shut, it was open just enough to creak. I reached for the handle, ready to slide it closed, but something made me freeze. Through the narrow opening, I could see the edge of our wooden deck and the patch of grass beyond it. The light from the neighbor's porch cast a soft glow on the yard, and in that glow, I saw a silhouette. Someone was standing perfectly still at the edge of the light, facing our house. For a few seconds, I didn't move. My first thought was that it could be our neighbor, maybe checking something outside. But the figure didn't shift or wave. It just stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, completely motionless. The wind carried the faint sound of a chime, and I realized the figure's shadow stretched across our fence like a smear of darkness. I took a small step back and whispered, "Mom." My voice cracked slightly, but she didn't respond right away. The TV was still murmuring in the background, masking the tension that was filling the room. I could feel the draft slipping in through the open gap, cold against my hands. When I looked back through the glass, the figure hadn't moved an inch. I didn't want to make any noise that might draw attention. I slowly leaned forward to grab the door handle, but before I could touch it, lightning flashed across the sky. For that brief second, the whole yard lit up like daylight. The figure's shape was clearer now, tall, with a hood covering its head and hands hanging loosely by its sides. But the moment the light faded, the space it stood in was empty. I blinked, trying to adjust to the darkness again. My pulse was racing as I pressed my hand against the cool glass. The spot where I'd just seen someone was now completely bare, just the neighbor's porch light and the wet shimmer of grass. I stood there for another few seconds, my heart pounding, before finally locking the door tight and pulling the curtains shut. I didn't tell my mom right away. I didn't want to sound paranoid over something that might have just been a trick of the light. Still, I couldn't shake how real it looked. The faint shape, the stillness, it was too clear to be my imagination. I sat back down at the kitchen table, trying to calm my breathing, pretending to scroll my phone again like nothing happened. But I kept glancing at the back curtains every few seconds, half expecting them to move. The thunder outside was getting louder now, echoing through the house. My mom came into the kitchen, holding a folded towel in her arms, and noticed how tense I looked. "You okay?" she asked. I just nodded, forcing a small smile, but my eyes betrayed me. They were fixed on the window behind her. She followed my gaze and frowned. "Did you close the door?" I nodded again, this time more firmly. "Yeah, it's locked," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, a faint tapping sound came from the glass. We both froze. It wasn't loud, just a soft, irregular tap, like a fingernail brushing against the door. Mom put the towel down and whispered, "Probably a branch." I wanted to believe that, but the wind had died down after the last lightning flash. The house felt unnervingly still again. She went closer to peek through the curtains, but I grabbed her arm. "Don't," I said quietly. My tone must have startled her because she hesitated. "Why?" she asked. I didn't know how to explain without sounding crazy. "I just thought I saw someone out there a minute ago," I whispered. Her expression softened slightly, the way it does when parents think you're just spooking yourself. She gave a little sigh and gently pushed the curtain aside anyway. I turned away, not wanting to see what was on the other side. When she stepped back, she looked confused. "There's nothing," she said. But the way her voice trembled made me realize she wasn't completely sure of that herself. She went to turn off the kitchen light, saying, "Maybe it's just glare from the neighbor's light." The kitchen fell into dimness, and that's when I noticed it. The shadow of someone standing outside the fence again, only this time closer. I couldn't tell if it was the same figure or not, but the outline was clearer now against the soft glow from the neighbor's yard. My mom turned to grab her phone, and in that moment, another flash of lightning filled the sky. The shadow was gone again. Not moved, not faded, gone. The timing made it worse, like it was using the light itself to vanish. My mom started dialing our neighbor's number, saying she'd ask if anyone was outside, but I was already moving toward the hallway. Something about standing near that window felt wrong, like I was being watched through more than just glass. Every instinct told me to step away, yet I couldn't stop glancing back, half hoping, half dreading that the next flash might show the figure again. The storm reached its peak within minutes. The rain poured harder, hitting the roof in fast, uneven bursts. I sat on the couch with my mom, both of us pretending to focus on the TV while keeping our ears tuned for any sound from the back door. Every thunderclap made my chest tighten, like it was shaking the silence apart. I wanted to believe whatever I saw was gone with the lightning. Mom's phone buzzed. Our neighbor texted back saying no one was outside and their motion light hadn't triggered all night. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. I couldn't stop picturing that hooded figure standing in the same faint glow, its head slightly tilted toward our house. I didn't know what bothered me more, the idea that someone had been there, or that they could have vanished that fast. A loud thump broke through the storm. It came from the back of the house again. Mom looked at me wide-eyed, and without a word, I stood up. We crept toward the kitchen, every step feeling slower than the last. The curtain by the sliding door moved slightly, as if air were seeping in again. That shouldn't have been possible. The door was locked. I grabbed the nearest thing, a flashlight from the drawer, and shone it toward the door. The beam reflected off the glass, but something on the other side caught it. Smudges. Dozens of faint, wet handprints near the handle. They weren't there before. My mom whispered my name, barely audible over the thunder, and stepped back. Her face went pale, eyes locked on the glass. Then came another flash of lightning, bright, electric, almost white. And in that split second, the figure was there again. Standing right outside, pressed against the glass, face obscured by the hood, hands hanging limply at its sides. Its outline flickered in the light, like a photograph that didn't belong in this frame of time. When the brightness faded, it was gone again. I nearly dropped the flashlight. My mom gasped softly, covering her mouth, her breath shaking. "We're calling the police," she whispered, but I could tell she didn't believe they'd find anyone. I reached for my phone, but before I could unlock it, something hit the fence outside, a heavy scraping sound that moved from one end to the other, like someone dragging something metallic along the wood. Neither of us spoke. We just stood there in silence until the rain finally started to calm. After several minutes of stillness, I mustered enough courage to pull the curtain back again. The backyard was soaked, the light from the neighbor's porch still glowing faintly. The fence was marked with long, wet streaks, where something had brushed against it. But there was no figure, no movement, nothing but the storm dying away. The next morning, the air smelled fresh, like nothing unusual had happened. When I went outside, I saw footprints leading from our deck to the far end of the fence, large ones, clearly human, ending right where the grass met the mud. Beyond that, no trace. We never found out who or what it was. But even now, every time lightning flashes, I can't help glancing toward that fence, just to be sure it's still empty. When I was 15, my best friend Mason lived 2 houses down from me on a quiet suburban street. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where every backyard looked the same: fences, swing sets, and neatly trimmed lawns. There wasn't much to do at night, so we'd make our own fun. Most of the time, that meant sneaking into people's yards just to scare each other. Our favorite spot was the house directly behind Mason's. The old couple who lived there rarely came outside, and their backyard had this small wooden swing set that creaked when the wind hit it. It wasn't anything special, but the way it sat under the dim security light made it look eerie after dark. Mason once dared me to touch it at midnight, claiming it moved even when the air was still. We kept going back there every few weekends, hopping the fence and laughing quietly like idiots. It was stupid fun, something harmless we thought no one would ever know about. But there was one night I wish we never stepped foot in that yard. That was the night the swing was already moving, before either of us touched it. It started like any other night. Mason texted me around 10 p.m. saying his parents were asleep and asking if I was up for a dare. I grabbed a hoodie, snuck out my back door, and met him near the fence between our yards. He was holding a flashlight, grinning like always. "Loser goes first," he whispered, shining the beam through the gaps in the fence. The neighbor's light was on again, casting that same orange glow across their backyard. Everything looked quiet until we both noticed the swing shifting slightly back and forth. Mason froze mid-step. "Dude, did you see that?" he whispered. I nodded, staring hard at the empty seat as it swayed just enough to make that low creaking sound we both hated. I remember feeling my throat tighten, but I tried to laugh it off. "Probably the fence moving air or something," I said, even though there wasn't the slightest breeze. Mason smirked, though I could tell he didn't buy it. "Fine," he said. "Go touch it." My stomach dropped. I didn't want to, but I wasn't about to back out in front of him. We climbed over the fence quietly, landing on the patchy grass with soft thuds. The ground felt oddly uneven beneath my shoes, like parts of it had been dug up recently. The swing was still moving when we got closer. Slow, steady, too rhythmic to be natural. The light above it flickered once, casting brief shadows that made the ropes look longer than they should have been. I reached out and caught the seat, the creaking stopping instantly. Mason laughed quietly behind me, whispering something about me being dramatic. But before I could turn around, I noticed something else, another set of footprints in the dirt right behind the swing. They weren't ours. They were older, pressed deep, like someone had been standing there for a while just watching. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at those footprints behind the swing, my mind racing to come up with an explanation. They were too large to be Mason's, and the edges looked hardened, like they'd been there for more than a day. Mason noticed me staring and stepped closer, shining the flashlight down. "Weird," he muttered, crouching beside them. "No one's been out here, right?" I shook my head. The couple who lived there never came outside at night, at least not that we'd ever seen. "Let's just go," I said, but Mason grinned, refusing to let it end that easily. "Come on, don't wimp out. We came here for a dare," he said. He swung the flashlight toward the back of the yard where the light didn't reach, like he was trying to find something else creepy. That's when we both heard it. A faint sound, like the quiet squeak of another swing. But there was only one in the yard. Mason turned the flashlight back toward the set, and my stomach dropped. The swing beside the one I'd touched, one we both swore had been broken for months, was now rocking slightly, its rope creaking with each motion. Mason whispered, "That wasn't moving before." His tone wasn't mocking anymore. It was uncertain. I tried to convince myself that maybe I hadn't noticed it earlier, maybe it just looked broken in the dark, but something about the way it swayed, smooth, steady, without any sound from the wind, felt wrong. It looked too intentional. He stepped closer and gave it a push, like he was testing it. The moment his hand touched the rope, it stopped completely. No recoil, no slow swing back, just stillness. I backed away a step, scanning the yard for any sign of someone else. Every shadow looked sharper, heavier. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination, but I thought I saw movement near the corner of the fence. I whispered his name, but he didn't turn around. He was staring at the ground again, this time near the swing's base. "There's more footprints," he said, his voice low. I leaned in to see, 3 sets now, overlapping slightly. 2 large, 1 smaller, like a child's. None of them matched ours. The dirt around them was uneven, pressed as if someone had been pacing. I felt my skin crawl. "We should seriously go," I said. "This isn't funny anymore." Mason nodded reluctantly, turning off his flashlight for a second as we started toward the fence. But then, from the darkness behind us, came the faintest creak, the sound of the swing moving again. Except this time, it was louder, sharper, like someone heavier had just sat down. Neither of us turned at first. We didn't need to. We could feel it, that shift in the air when you know you're not alone. The light from the house next door flickered faintly through the slats in the fence, and I swear I saw a shape pass in front of it, not clearly enough to make out a face, but just enough to know it was there, watching us. Mason whispered, "Run," but neither of us did right away. We were both frozen, staring at the swing as it moved back and forth with a steady rhythm. The sound of the rope stretching echoed faintly in the quiet yard. Finally, Mason nudged my arm, snapping me out of it, and we bolted toward the fence. The flashlight beam bounced wildly as we ran. When we reached the fence, Mason tried to climb first. The wooden boards felt slick under my hands like they'd been damp, even though the night air was dry. He got halfway up, but then froze. "Someone's behind us," he whispered. His voice cracked. I turned, and in that dim light, I saw a figure standing near the swing set, tall, motionless, right between the 2 swings that were now both swaying. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of a person, standing with their head tilted slightly to one side. The orange light from the neighbor's porch hit the edge of their shoulder, but the rest of their body was swallowed in darkness. They weren't moving, not even breathing from what I could tell. The swing ropes kept creaking softly, filling the silence that hung between us. Mason dropped down and whispered harshly, "Go around front." We slipped along the fence line, keeping low, our shoes crunching on gravel. My chest felt tight as we crept toward the corner gate. When Mason pushed it open, it let out a long creak that sounded way too loud. We both winced and looked back toward the swing set. The figure was gone. We didn't waste another second. We ran straight through the neighbor's side yard and didn't stop until we were back at Mason's driveway, gasping for air. His flashlight flickered weakly, then died altogether. The house lights were still off, the street silent except for the distant hum of traffic. We stood there for what felt like forever, just trying to convince ourselves we hadn't really seen it. The next day, we swore we'd go back to prove it was all in our heads. In daylight, the neighbor's yard looked normal again. The swings were still, the ropes tight, nothing unusual. But when Mason looked down at the dirt, his expression changed. The footprints were still there, ours, and another set leading directly from the swings to the fence where we'd escaped. After that, we never went near that yard again. Mason stopped mentioning it, and I tried to forget, but every now and then, I'd catch the swing moving when I walked past the fence. Always slow, always alone. I told myself it was just the wind, though I knew it wasn't. Years later, after the old couple moved out, new owners tore down the swing set entirely. But even now, when I visit my parents and walk by that house, I can't help glancing toward the empty corner of the yard. Because sometimes, even without the swings, I swear I still see that faint outline standing there, like it's waiting for someone to come back.